In this tutorial we're going to create and animate a bouncing ball, and we'll be using some of the principles of animation in using squash and stretch along with pose to pose animation. So let's get started by opening up Maya. The first thing we want to do is, as a good practice, is to create a project window. So let's go down File and click on Project Window, and you'll see you've got, by default, you have all these folders set up for the project window, and when we set it up this way, it will automatically save the assets that we create or import into the proper folder. So let's click on New, and then let's navigate to where we want to save it. So we want to create our own pathway, and I'm just going to save this onto my desktop, and so you can see that in there as the pathway, and select desktop, and I'm going to name it Bouncing Ball and accept. So as I said, everything now that I create and save, all the scenes that I save will be saved in there. And let's save this scene as, go down here into file name, Bouncing Ball 1, Bouncing _ Ball 1, and then click Save As, or you can hit Enter. And then you can see it's got the name up here. And if you navigate to your folder, you'll be able to find it in there, and in Scenes it should be right there in Bouncing Ball. Now at this point there are different ways that you can create the ball, which will be a primitive shape sphere. You can go up to the shelf and click directly onto that, and it'll automatically create a sphere. So that's a quick way to do it. I'm going to undo now. Just press Z or Command or Control Z, or you can go to Create, then Polygon Primitives, choose Sphere. You can click on that, or if you want to have a customized sphere where you can change the axis divisions, by default you have 20 and 20 in the height divisions as well, and the radius is at 1. We'll just accept the default, and there it is. And you can see it's exactly the same as the sphere we created by going to the shelf. Now press the F key, and that'll bring it to full, and press the Option key, and so we can rotate around the object. And you can see, if you look down in the lower left corner of the panel, that you can see where you are in 3D space, in the world space. So if you rotate that, you can see the X is going left and right, Y is going up and down, and Z is going forward and back. And that helps keep you oriented in the space, 3D space. Now over here you have the different control tools and the different panel selections. If you click here, you can see it in the different orthographic views, and whichever one you mouse over, if you press the space bar, then that'll toggle to that view. So you got the side view, the front view, and the top view. And while you're in any of these, you press the F key and it'll bring it to full. So okay, and let's go back into the perspective view, mouse over that, and then press the space bar, and there we are. You also have the choice to go to these two panels, and you can also customize this, but we're not going to get into that right now. And now that we have our ball, let's name the ball by going into the attribute editor. Go over to the right here, and you'll see you have these different tabs here. If it's not chosen already, choose the attribute editor tab, And then you'll see these tabs up here that show you some of the attributes of the default polysphere that we created. And you can see you've got the same under polysphere 1, you've got the same attributes that we had in the option box that we clicked when we went in to create the sphere in the first place. Under the polysphere 1 tab, let's click and drag to select that name, and let's rename it ball. And then click the initial shading group, and we can look at that. That's the default material, which is called Lambert. We're going to change that to a different type of material. We're going to change it to a shiny material. So the way we do that is we go to the sphere, right click on it, and go down to Assign New Material and release. Now there you'll see you have several different choices of material. We're going to choose one that's shiny. So that could be Blinn or Fong E, and there are other different kinds of shaders. We'll just click on Blinn, and you can see it's got a little gloss to it. Click on that, and that'll assign that new glossy material to the sphere. And you can see there's a little gloss right there. If you click off it to deselect it, you can see there's that little gloss. Hold down the Option key and rotate it, and you can see that gloss moves. What's happening is you have a default light that is shining on that and creating, a virtual light and creating that gloss. Now if we go over to the attribute editor again and click on Blinn, and then we can see the attributes of that material that we just assigned to the ball. Let's rename that from Blinn 1 to ball color. And you can go down to this chip, this color chip, click on that. The default is a gray, which with the shiny material has kind of a metallic look, kind of like a silvery look, or even stainless steel kind of a thing, depending on how reflective it is. So once we're in here, and you can see in this color wheel that you have this is the position of the color where it is now. Let's just click on red, and let's choose a bright red. Makes it really easy to see, and it'll be our red rubber ball. And once we have that color chosen, we can click out of it, or as we mouse off of it, it'll go away. And you can see your sample has that gloss on it, and the chip now is colored red. There are other controls that we can play around with here, such as eccentricity, which will change that gloss and make it a little bit more diffuse or brighter. And specular roll-off, which will intensify or diffuse that. And we can change the specular color if we want, but we'll just leave it pretty much at the default. Maybe add a little bit more brightness and eccentricity to it. Okay, now let's go back to the ball, and we're going to be creating a surface for this to bounce on. But as you can see, if we rotate up, that it's on the grid, and I would prefer to have the surface that we create, kind of a table or a floor, if you will, to be even with the grid here. It just kind of makes it, for me, visually easier to reference. So we want to move this ball up so that the bottom of the ball is even with the grid here. We want to go into the channel box, and that is done by clicking this icon here. As you can see, show hide channel box. Okay, and so we go to that tab. As you can see here, now that we're in the channel box, it shows other attributes of the ball. So in translating it, the translate is the movement of the ball in 3D space. So we're going to want to move it up to a position of 1. So click on that and enter 1. And now you can see that it's moved up there. Now alternatively, I just undid it, pressed Z. Alternatively, we could use the move tool, which translates it, and move it up. And as we click on that yellow arrow to move it up, you can see over in the channel box that it changes the Y attribute. But if we want to be exact, then we just click it, the field there, and enter 1. So you can move back in and out by rotating the scroll wheel on your mouse, or you can hold down the Option key and right click on your mouse and hold it and drag it left and right. To rotate, you hold down the Option key and the left mouse button and rotate like that. And to move it in kind of just move the camera up and down, you hold down the middle mouse button and along with the Option key, and you can move it up and down kind of like in a 2D direction, back and forth, up and down. Really what you're doing is you're looking at the ball through a default camera, the perspective camera. And when you move it around in those ways we just did, that's what you're doing, is you're moving the camera, not the object. Moving the object itself is done with these tools here. So you have the move tool, which we just used. You can move it right and left in the X direction. And each time I'm doing this, I'm pressing Z to get back to the one move back. And you can move it in the Y direction, as I showed you before, or in the Z direction. I'm going to rotate around so you can see that better, the Z direction. And the colors are coded for the directions of in the directions of whichever you have selected. So X is red. I'm going to click off of it. It just remains, whichever one you had selected last remains the color. So if I click the middle, then it deselects them. So you have X is red, Y is green, and Z is blue. And now that we have our ball created, let's move it back to where we're going to start. Let's put it back to the back of the grid and move it up. And you can see the changes that we've put here in the channel box. So let's enter that, -12. And we'll take it up, let's see. We'll start a little higher. Give it somewhere to go as far as its bounce is concerned. Let's say about 10. That's a good height to start with. Now let's create our table or floor. So let's create from the shelf this time. Click on the polygon cube and you can see it comes down here. You can see it doesn't have any subdivisions like the sphere has. It just has 6 sides like any cube would have. So let's click on that, and now we're going to model it. Going to change its size. So to do that, press the R key, or you can choose the scale tool. And let's stretch it out so that it goes all the way to the end of our grid. And you can see if we have the channel box open, it would be all the way, it would be 24. So let's type in 24 and then back in to the grid. Let's scale it out in the X direction, and you can see that that's scaled out to about 10. 10 should be good enough, so let's just type in 10. And you can see by default that it starts at the origin, and so we want to move it down. And as I said, we want to have this floor even with the grid. So we need to enter a value in the translate to move it down. So we're about half a unit up. Let's type in minus 0.5, and that'll move it down even with the grid, and we can check it by rotating it around. All right, let's give a texture to our floor here, or table. I'll probably be using those terms interchangeably. And we'll do it the same way that we did with the ball, only this time we're going to add a pre-made texture. So right-click on the object and go down to Assign New Material. And we're going to use another shiny material. Let's go ahead and this time let's choose Fong. And let's rename this shape the table in the attribute editor. And we're going to name this material Fong 1. Let's just call it granite. Okay, now you can see if you're not in the attribute editor, you need to go to that attribute editor tab. Remember, you got these tabs here. This is your channel box, and then you have your attribute editor. All right. And down here, remember we went to the color chip. This time instead we're going to add a texture to it. So you need to go to this little checkerboard thing which represents texture. Click on that, and that opens up the Create Render Node window. So you can see you have a list of different pre-made textures. Everything from leather, marble, rock, snow. And so as I mentioned, we're going to choose granite, and when we do that you can see that it shows the granite material in the sample and then the different colors, and you can change the color of the granite if you like. You can go into each of these chips and change it just like we changed the color in the other one. And notice in the viewer here in the perspective panel that it has now added this green little cage thing, and that represents the texture. So you can click on that and you can edit some of the attributes of that if you want, or you can move it. Now if you click on the object, then you'll see this is our granite material in the sample, as I said. Now go down to your keyboard and we're going to go through the different modes of viewing that we have. Okay, so right now we're in the shaded mode. If you press 4, that goes into the wireframe mode. As you can see, when we go back and forth, the wireframe display is now on. Press 5 and that goes into the shaded display. And press 6 and that goes into our shaded display with texture maps. And you can see we have kind of a blurry rendition of that granite. It looks sort of stretched out and weird. But that's okay. We can also preview now how that will look in a render. So let's go up to the render settings, display render settings, and click on that. And that opens up the render settings window. We need to set this up so we can render and view something that is visible to us. Now it defaults to the Arnold renderer. We're not going to use that. So click on the drop down and we're going to choose Maya software. Okay, and you can see the change in the tabs that are available. Now let's look down here under the Common tab and it defaults to Maya IFF, which we're not going to use. Click on that, go to the drop down, and scroll down, and we're going to choose PNG, and that'll have an alpha channel so that we can composite this over any background that we want. And now, since we're going to be doing an animation, we need to change this from a single frame to multiple frames. So we're going to choose this version of it, which is the name, bouncing ball, and number. It'll be 0, 1 through 200, or how many we decide, and then PNG is the extension. So let's choose that, and let's go down a little further, and from the frame range, it starts at 1. We're going to change this to 200. And scroll down a little further. We're going to use the default renderable camera, the perspective one that we're looking through now. Make sure that the alpha channel mask is checked, and we'll leave this at 540 pixels, so it's a 16 by 9 aspect ratio at 960 by 540. We don't need it any bigger than that. And then once that's done, close it, and we're ready to go. We can do a render current frame, and so this is frame 1. Go up to this button here, and you can see the render current frame. So click on that, and that renders it. And so now you see we have the ball, and we have the granite counter or floor or table. That granite look is pretty tight. I think that the grain on that is a little bit too small. So let's change that. So click out of that. We can make the changes by first click on that texture cage, and that'll enable us to make changes. So you go back into the channel box, click on granite, and then that shows all the different channels that can be changed. Or we can go to the attribute editor and make the changes there. Click on interactive placement, and you can see now we have controls for scaling and moving. So let's try scaling it in the X direction, and then scaling it in the Z direction about evenly. And once we do that, that should make that grain a little bit bigger. And let's do a render of the current frame. And that looks a little bit better. I want to do it even more. So let's stretch it out all the way so it's even with that end, and then about the same ratio this way. That's looking pretty good. So click out of it, and let's just click onto the counter and press the Q key for the select tool. And now we're ready to animate.